I would like to introduce Michael to everybody. I'm sure most people here know Michael, but for those of you who are participating for the first time, I would like to just give you a brief overview. Um, Michael Feener is professor here at the Center for Southeast Asian Studies. He's professor of the cross-regional studies here at our center. He's also associate member of the history faculty at the University of Oxford as well. He was formerly a research leader of religion at the Globalization Research Cluster at ARI at the National University of Singapore, and also a Sultan of Oman Fellow at the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies as well. He has taught at numerous universities around the world as well, and he has also held professorships and also fellowships at many other universities. He's published very extensively in the fields of Islamic studies and Southeast Asian history, especially on in the field of post-disaster reconstruction, religion, and development. Michael joined us last year. He got here just before the Japanese government made it very difficult for people to enter the country. And he brought with him a very large project, which will be running for the next 5 years, the Maritime Asia Heritage Survey. And it's on this that he will be talking to us today. So without further ado, I would like to pass over the floor to Michael. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mario, for that generous introduction. And thank you all for making the time to join us today and for your interest in the work of our project. We do have a number of our team members from the Digital Heritage Documentation Lab that we've set up here in Kyoto online today, as well as a number of members from our field teams in both Indonesia and the Maldives. And so I'm hoping that when we get to the question and answer session, we might be able to hear from some of them as well. But let me start at least with a general overview of the project, give you a little sense of what it is that we're up to, and then I really look forward to hearing any comments and questions you might have after that. So here we are, we're moving through. Great, so the first thing I'd like to do is to introduce the genesis of this project. And the Maritime Asia Heritage Survey actually grew out of a pilot phase project that was based in Oxford, and it was called the Maldives Heritage Survey, and it was really focused on this nation of small coral islands in a series of atolls in the center of the Indian Ocean. The project really tried to build for the first time ever a kind of an integrated source base for the study of the history of the Maldives, because it was one of these places that, although it has a very long and quite complex history of interconnections with places like the East African coast, the Arabian Peninsula, South Asia, and the Indonesian archipelago, there was very little published information about the Maldives in terms of studying its history seriously, even in major research university libraries like the Bodleian at Oxford. And so in many ways, this was in a sense an attempt to create a new kind of library, a library though that was born digital and that was open access. That project ran for about 2.5 years out of Oxford with a field team working about 10 months a year, which is a very long season for an archaeological survey in the Maldives. And with my move here to Kyoto last year, we were able to not only transfer that over, but to initiate a much larger extension of the project, which is what I'll be talking about today. Guess I could go in the other direction. Yeah, so our work in the Maldives was able to bring to light for the first time ever really a very rich set of source material ranging from digitized manuscripts to architectural plans to archaeological data on pre-Islamic sites, and bring them all into one easy to access source. These are just a few examples of the sort of things that we were able to document during the pilot phase of the study. And it was really based on the success that we had in that pilot phase that we're able to get the funding for this more ambitious expansion. So what we're trying to do in the course of our work is to provide this open access and permanently archived resource that will give us information on the cultural heritage of a really fascinating region of the world, but especially looking at those elements of heritage that are threatened by a combination of natural and human threats. And so on the illustrations that you see on the side here, you see what it is that we're up against, right? Whether it's from the ravages of climate change that are devastating to coastal regions across Asia, and particularly to places like the Maldives, to acts of human vandalism. And the image you see up in the corner at the top here is the result of some vandalism at the Maldives National Museum back in 2012, just before we started our work. In this expansion of the project, we will be working not only to complete the first ever systematic archaeological survey done in the Maldives, right? It'll create a whole brand new database, but we'll also be moving and expanding operations using our same basic field methodology in a number of new countries. We've already opened up operations in Indonesia, where we have a team at work in Aceh as we speak. And over the coming years, we'll be opening up other branches of the survey in Brunei, Vietnam, and Sri Lanka. Now, all of these countries are not only linked by centuries of maritime trade across Southern Asia, but they're also really interesting to look at together because the ways in which each of them brings together a history of Indic circulations, right? Largely Hindu and then Buddhist networks that connected much of the region in the late first millennium and the early second millennium. And many of these areas too became major points for the kind of the rewiring of those networks in the hands of Muslim merchants and seafarers over the past 5 centuries or so. And so we've got some really interesting ways to think about comparative shifts in the ways in which maritime networks worked when we finally get all of our data together. So here at CSEAS in Kyoto, we have managed very generously to receive a couple of rooms to set up for our project here. We now have an administrative office and a new digital heritage documentation lab. And we've been making hires. We have a couple more to come, but you can see here all of our Kyoto-based members. We managed to get them all together for a photograph just the other day. And so you see our project just, I guess, right to left, left to right. In the green scarf, it's Christina Varanya. She's our digital, her database manager. My co-PI based here in Kyoto, Professor Ishikawa Noburo. Ikeda Mizuho, who is our historical documentation manager. Our overall project manager, Era, or Maida Irowani, right next to me in the black. Then Kata Kanese, who also works in the Digital Heritage Lab, working on our database. And finally, Hayase Miho, who's our admin and finance assistant for the project. We also have something of a forward operating base of types. We're working now on formalizing a relationship with the Earth Observatory of Singapore at Nanyang Technological University, where the other project co-PI, Patrick Daly, is based. And we hope to be basing a new postdoc there as well soon. Now that gives us a sort of a core team internationally, especially managing things on the digital side. But we also have field teams in country of about 7 to 8 people apiece. We have the field teams now in the Maldives and in Indonesia, and we'll be expanding then to start recruitment in Brunei, Vietnam, and Sri Lanka over the years to come. And this has been something that's been really interesting in the way the team has built itself up, because it really has sort of, in a sense, given new life to some of these historic connections across maritime Southern Asia. And so in the pilot phase of the project, I actually brought a number of my colleagues from Aceh who'd worked with us on earlier projects over to the Maldives to begin to work with and start to train a new generation of Maldivians to work on this kind of survey. And now they're moving forward with their own and recruiting their own new people there. So we're, in a sense, trying to reactivate some of these connections on a very personal and contemporary level as well. In terms of field work, we combine a sort of a range of methodologies from very old school archaeological survey. You can see people there sort of measuring tapes out and sketchbooks with some more high-tech resources that we use in the field, including drones and a Lidar laser scanner. And the next phase of the project will also be ramping up to include a new piece of kit, which is aerial Lidar. That is a sort of laser scanners that can be mounted on small drones and flown around. And this will be a sort of an amazing new aspect of our work. It will allow us not only to begin to more easily identify archaeological sites under dense canopies of the tropical forest, which of course is quite common across the region, but it will also allow us to provide sort of a new quality of 3D scans for architectural plans that can be used for conservation and restoration projects. And so you get a sense here of just what the field work has entailed. Now, over the pilot phase of the project in the Maldives, we had to deal with both a place where there had been relatively little archaeological work done before we got there, but also with some rather tricky and challenging topography, right? So there's over 1,200 islands in the Maldives, but only about 200 of them are inhabited, or at least currently inhabited. And so our methodology involved a sort of a combination of, when we ended up on inhabited islands, we would at first schedule a meeting with the island council. We would meet with local leadership. We would introduce ourselves to the community. We'd talk about what they were doing, and we'd work very closely with local communities to help us sort of identify and contextualize some of the sites that we were working on. And so our website includes a section of oral history interviews that we've conducted with people who live around these sites all the time, giving their perspectives on them. On the vast majority of islands in the Maldives, however, we're dealing with currently uninhabited islands. And so this usually means showing up on a small boat, wading ourselves ashore, in a sense, walking the island in a grid with machetes in hand and GPS in the other, cutting our way through and looking for whatever we might find to be able to identify potential sites for documentation. So the documentation that we do when we finally identified a site includes both measurements and GPS coordinates, a range of photographs, both for standalone illustrations, but also to be used in photogrammetric 3D renderings. We also use our Lidar scanner to provide this sort of centimeter resolution archaeological measurements on things like mosques and other built structures. And then we also include the oral history interviews I mentioned before, and something that you don't find in many archaeological surveys, which is the digitization of local manuscripts, right? And so sometimes associated with a mosque or a tomb or some other structures, the community will hold certain manuscripts. In the Maldives, these have been mostly in either Arabic or Devehi, and we'll also negotiate permissions to photograph, scan them, and put them up in an interactive IIIF formatted manuscript viewer on our website. And that's something that has attracted considerable attention from some scholars abroad who are looking at the sort of this new textual source base that might be used for sort of a broader and deeper history of the Maldives. So at the end of the day, when the team comes in from the field, they will meet our data wrangler back at the field house, and they'll hand over all the SD cards and other equipment so that we can begin to upload all of the photos, the GIS information, the videos, anything else we collect in the field up onto the cloud so it can be processed by our digital heritage documentation lab. And with that data, they can produce a number of things, from the database records that are really at the core of the project, to sort of more enhanced records, these sort of more robust 3D scans and architectural plans that help not only generate broader interest in the project, but also provide the kinds of detailed information that can be very useful for people who are doing things like, say, making bids for heritage registration or making concrete plans for either conservation or preservation registration. Now, because a lot of the work that we do is in areas that are unfamiliar to many people, even many world historians, our team also puts together a number of sort of specially designed resources that can help users to contextualize the material. You see, for example, up here on the screen, we have a glossary of architectural features and ornamentation motifs that we have assembled in the field in interaction with local communities we've done there, to give both local names and English names to particular kinds of features that can then help people better understand what it is that they're looking at when they look at our records. I guess you guys have seen that already. How do I get next? Yeah, and this just is an example of what we do. Now, in the Maldives, as I mentioned before, there had been very little systematic archaeological survey work done in the country before. And so most of the places we were going, we were flying blind. But there were a few sites that had been studied previously, including a handful of pre-Islamic, mostly Buddhist sites that had been surveyed back at the turn of the 20th century by a British civil servant based in Ceylon named CHP Bell. And so on those sites that we do have earlier documentation, you can see this piece up on the left of the screen. This is Bell's plan of a site on an island called Dagan in the Lamu Atoll. And you can see that he and his team there were able to identify about a half dozen structures. our team, with a little bit more elbow grease and cutting through the brush, has been able to take those early records and significantly enhance them to provide something like what you see on the main screen here, which is, one of the most extensive mappings that we have ever done, really, of an artificial mound site linked to a Buddhist ritual complex in the Maldives. We can see here, the whole processional access and various other buildings here. Now, on the expanded phase of the project, we'll be doing considerably more with the enhancement of pre-existing records, and I'll talk about that in just a bit. But in terms of what we come up with for a final product, I would really hope that at least some of you will take the time to take a look at our website sometime soon. There on the website, you can find our database, which is searchable and which can give you access to the sort of nuts and bolts documentation for every site that we have surveyed. That will include things like GIS positions, it will include things like measurements, a sample of photographs, and also some of these sketch plan, site plans or elevations done on AutoCAD. But you'll also be able to find 3D visualizations, digitized manuscripts, and all of those resources that I'd spoken about just a moment ago. How are we doing for time? Okay, great. I just want to go back since I have more to speak about. So I mentioned the enhancement of pre-existing records. So one of the things that will be nice for us as we move into these other countries like Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Vietnam, these are all places that have had significant histories of archaeological study before we got there. And so whereas in the Maldives, a lot of our stuff, a lot of our work was really first phase exploration and basic mapping. As we move into the into countries like Vietnam and Indonesia and Sri Lanka, we'll be working closely with local authorities and working with previous scholarship on the region to identify sites that might benefit from some enhanced documentation. And also, while we're in those regions, to explore other sites that might be around and lesser known or previously unknown. And so we'll have a much bigger database here that will not only present the fruits of firsthand mapping exercises, but also enhancing the kinds of records that are out there. And with the help of our historical documentation manager, be able to link them more effectively to other sites in the region that will help sort of scholars and also people in the heritage industry who are really looking to better understand the ways in which different local traditions might be connected in a bigger view of, say, the history of maritime Southern Asia. Now, in addition to working to enhance records through our own survey, we're also adding a new element to this project in the countries outside the Maldives in the form of integrating pre-existing data sets that had not previously been published or had been previously underpublished or otherwise hard to get to. And so working with a number of partners ranging from individual scholars to university initiatives to government databases, we are negotiating relationships on a number of fronts right now where we're able to access pre-existing data sets, work with them, clean them up a little bit, format them into a way that can integrate it into the consolidated database that we're building online that will not only make this information more easily available, but also facilitate searches and cross-referencing across this. And so in the very first phase of the project this year, we're already working to integrate a rather large data set that we worked on under a project led by my co-PI in this project, was PI in the last project called the Aceh Geohazard Survey, where we have a huge amount of information from the north coast of Sumatra. So that will all be now integrated and worked into the database. We also are working with the Indonesian Ministry of Culture and Education and Culture to take their National Registry of Heritage Sites, integrate that into our database, and be able to enhance and improve some of those records with new forms of documentation. And closer to home here in Japan, we're working with our colleagues on the Nishimura Chowtan Shipwreck Project, which has been looking at a late first millennium shipwreck site off the coast of central Vietnam. And they are also making their database available to us, and we'll be working with them also to integrate that into this new consolidated cross-referencing and searchable online database over the months to come. Yeah. Now, to facilitate these kinds of relationships, we do try to work very hard to make very solid project partnerships at nearly all levels. And so in each of the countries where we work, we always first go in to try to establish things that are on a ministerial level, usually with the ministries of culture or the ministries of education in each of these countries, to make sure that we've got a sort of a legal standing and a sort of a nationwide remit to be able to conduct our work as we move across each of these countries. So you can see the signing of an MOU up there on the top. But at the same time, we also work very much on the grassroots level with every island community that we visited in the Maldives, holding these sessions where we introduce ourselves, we introduce the projects, and begin ongoing conversations with members of local communities to help us to identify and to understand what these sites might mean to them locally. And so over the course of the project, we've spent sort of considerable work on community engagement, right? Which has not only provided us with remarkable material in the form of the oral history interviews, but I think also has helped to begin to communicate something of what our project might be able to contribute to particular local concerns and local needs. And so, for example, we've got projects in the Maldives where we've done things with local village communities. We've also done outreach sessions with the National University of the Maldives, where I've given lectures, and had other sessions at the National Museum. But I really think it's this sort of multi-pronged engagement that we have across the board, and the sort of the spectrum of building between sort of interactions on the ground level and leading all the way up through the national to the sort of global resource that we're putting online in the form of an open access and permanently archived database that allows, we hope, for some more sustainable engagements with the kind of digital heritage documentation that we're producing over the course of our work. Now, in terms of findings, in terms of findings, one of the things that I think might be of most interest and use to our colleagues here at the Center for Southeast Asian Studies is the ways in which this new formulation of maritime Southern Asia is able to both build on the strengths of traditional area studies of a region like Southeast Asia, and to give a much more concrete sense of the ways in which this sort of demarcated region as a sort of 20th century and 21st century area of focus is both historically related to, it can be meaningfully interpreted in relation to sort of much broader sections of the planet, right? And so our project, in a sense, brings together the work of traditional Southeast Asian studies with the burgeoning field of work on the history of the Indian Ocean world to the west as we move through to Sri Lanka and the Maldives, and to work that's being done on the coast of East Asia. And so Vietnam, again, as it has long been in the field of Southeast Asian studies, providing a very interesting bridge to look at the longstanding historical connections between Northeast Asia and to Southeast Asia. So we will be very busy over the next 5 years in trying to do the work we already have planned in these 5 countries. But the plan is that if all goes well, we'll have developed a model here that can be further built on in the future to begin to incorporate other countries across the region and hopefully build the widest possible shared source base for future work in a kind of integrated model of area studies across the region. And I will think I'll stop there. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to questions and comments.